Hello YouTube, welcome back. Just me today. I hope you enjoyed the macadamia show that Garth and I did the other day, and keep providing feedback. It might encourage us to do one or two more, perhaps next time on Garth's farm. And if you haven't already, head on over to the Australian Macadamia channel and get some really quality entertainment. Now, it's a good old-fashioned stinker today, 35 degrees, and I have for the last few days been mowing, and I'm starting in block 6 to show you a contrast between some areas that have been mowed and some areas that are yet to be mowed. There's a reasonable chunk of grass in there, probably brought on by the earlier rains, although I have to say we're a little bit cynical about this La Nina stuff, because in October we actually had less than our normal rainfall, despite all the drama with hail in some areas and that sort of thing. It didn't actually add up to very much in millimetres. The block, however, which was a pretty sick block and cropped next to nothing last season, is showing some signs of doing good this season. I mean, these are some of the largest macadamia nuts I've ever seen on anyone's trees. And what variety is it? I don't know. Which brings me to the subject of this video. I laughed with Garth the other day saying, listen, I really don't know how I could ever do a video like yours. He does one every December going through his best varieties for the coming season. And as he explained in the macadamia show, the way he can tell is he waits till December when he can see the crop sizing up in the tree. And, because I don't know what most of my varieties are, I can't really give you an idea of what my best varieties are. Certainly from last year, it turns out my best variety was possibly the 800, which is an obscure variety that never really did that well in Australia, but one of the many descendants of 246. Turns out my A16s also did well, and it looks like they're doing well this year, which is a little bit of an embarrassment because I have thoroughly been convinced that A16 is a useless prima donna and doesn't belong on an orchard like mine, where I would rather things be a little lower maintenance. However, what I can do is give you my top varieties in my babies, and so this is the Nutkin Farm Baby Parade. So I'm going to follow Garth because his imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and I'm going to go from the worst to the best performing baby varieties for 2020. And bear in mind they were all planted about last autumn, different times than last autumn, and at different stages of maturity. So, starting with number 4, MCT1. I'm surprised this is the least well-performing new variety. They've put on a bit of height. There's some new growth on most of them. But, and look, they're vigorous enough. You can see some of these new leaves, really quite healthy. How much height have they put on? Maybe a foot since autumn. The main thing is to get a decent root system established. This one, by contrast, hasn't really done anything terribly much, and it looks like we have a casualty. The one at the end of this row here has basically died from the graft up. It had a bit of a crown gall fungus or some kind of fungus just above the graft, which seemed to kill everything above it. It's still trying to grow. You can see down the bottom there's a basal shoot, but that will not be true to the variety. And that tree, unless it sprouts again from the top, is a goner. So, yeah, when you look around at the trial plot here of 25, or I should probably say 24 trees now, you can see variable growth rates. Something's had a bit of a nibble at the leaves. I wouldn't hold that against them. If you'd watched the video of me planting these very trees, you'd have seen me talking about pinto peanut. And while not all of that struck because it wasn't really the best time of year to plant it. Here is an example of a patch of it that's going quite well. It spreads by these stolons, which are really as thick as buffalo. And it's got some yellow flowers. Now that's been mown over as well. So it's not in completely all its glory that it was in from before. And I'd say 1 in 5 has really sprouted. There's a happy example as well. Now bear in mind they can grow out 2 metres in the first year, or 2 metres per year from where they started. And despite sort of being a shade-liking legume, it's doing pretty well in full sun and with not a hell of amount of moisture. So anyway, there we have MCT1. On to our next contender. Coming in at number 3 is the 835. I really didn't want this to be number 3, and it was a very, very close call between it and number 2. Most of my 835s have put on, look, a good deal of height, nice green growth. There's the other one over here. In fact, this is the one that featured in one of my earlier videos as having little baby flowers on it. Now you can see up close that the flowers didn't come to anything, sorry. But the trees themselves are in pretty good shape. Not all of them have done as well as others, but what we're facing here is clearly a vigorous tree, and it's got multiple leaders. I guess it's a spreading tree, and there's some new flush there, so it's clearly getting a bit of a go on, again probably in response to the recent rains. But the trees haven't lost a single one, and they're all giving me a pretty good growing up performance. So there's number 3. Now, hot on the heels of the 835 is the 835's mummy or daddy, the 246. Now I put these fellas in a little bit earlier than the 835s, and they weren't such advanced saplings, but they've been very hardy. They've overcome a lot during a bit of a dry spell, and they're putting on some really impressive good growth. Again, some little saplings are better than others, but you can see an example of this, the new leaves just bursting from every direction, again in response to some recent rain and a little bit of hand watering that I do. There's a really good example of just growth coming out everywhere. I'd say it's now, based on my height, probably almost 4 foot high, and they're all doing pretty well, including this fella over here who we've filmed before. This was one that lasted right through the horror summer and the drought last season, the bushfires, everything else. It came out the other end, and you can see there lots of extremely good growth. So that's my number 2 for this season. But now we're going to move on to number 1. And don't need to pause here, it's just across the road, the 788. This thing is going like gangbusters. This is almost 5 foot tall, this fella. The big gracious growth, large generous leaves. It is clearly enjoying itself in this soil and in this climate. The 788 is, you can call one of my weird and wonderfuls, but it's one of the varieties selected to grow in China, where the climate really isn't right for growing macadamias, but somehow these fellas keep on developing. And I only have 4 of these. They were given to me sort of for guinea pig purposes by the Australian Macadamia Nursery up in Wolvie. Marco Prenzel threw them in, thinking I was going to be a reasonable candidate, And we have 4 out of 4 performing extremely well. You know, they're really getting on a good growth pattern. And you can tell, if they're not going to be big trees, they're certainly more of the upright character, and just doing beautifully. So, for that reason, 788's my number one. Consistently an excellent performer in its early growth pattern. Things may change. I may come back and do another video very much like this in a year's time, and we'll see how these babies have developed since then. I may have an entirely different opinion based on how they're going. Although, of course, we're not going to expect nuts from them. But just as a finishing shot here on block 1, this is a block which provided very little crop last year. And while I don't know what this variety is, it and a lot of the other surrounding trees have got some decent nuts. And so while my older blocks, which gave me the bulk of my crop, aren't visibly doing as well, or at least I can't see that they are, I know that these will be a different story this year and that this block will pull its weight. Thanks for watching, everyone. I will do another update soon, and I hope you stay well. Bye.